ruling delivered by Justice John Mativo on Wednesday. Mativo stated that adopted children have a right to know their biological parents when they come of age. Justice Mativo said although the Kenyan adoption laws are silent on disclosure of biological parents to an adopted child, the country should apply international conventions that recognize the right to identity and parental lineage. According to the judge, the question of whether adopted children need to know their lineage was made possible by Article 35 of the Constitution, which gives everyone the right to access information. He said adoption records are kept by the state and that under the Vienna Convention on the Right of Children, there's nothing wrong with the disclosure once the adopted one has turned 18 years and the disclosure is in his or her best interest. Now, just to tell us more or demystify for us this, now, adoption order cannot be granted unless the child concerned has been in the continuous care of the adopting couple for more than 3 consecutive months preceding the filing of the application, and both the child and the applicants may be evaluated and assessed by a registered adoption society in Kenya. It takes about 6 months to complete adoption process, bearing in mind that the adopting couple must reside in Kenya with the child for at least 3 months before the legal procedure begins. Now, a guardian litem is appointed by the court for the child pending the hearing and determination of the adoption application. Now, just to demystify for us this subject for us this morning, I'm joined in studio by someone who is well versed with this topic. Her name is Leah Kigwadha Muteru. Yes. She's a child and family lawyer. Yes. Good morning, Leah.
Good morning, Yusuf.
Good to have you on the show this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, when is the right time? You know, there are a lot of people who are asking, when is the right time for an adopted child to know his or her real parents, for instance?
The right time, in my view, is determined by the parents who have the child. Because they are with the child, they know, you know your child and the specific needs of your child. And so some people start really early. Actually, some people really start early. I have clients who start very early, and the conversation is usually around even as young as kindergarten, where a child knows that I was not born from my mommy's stomach, I was born from my mommy's heart. So we do need to have a conversation about adoption so that it's a national conversation, and children know there are different ways to come into a family. You can come in through natural birth, or you can come in through adoption. So I know people who've actually started very early. Other people, I have clients who, knowing the children's home the child came from, will visit often with the child from childhood. And then the child is able to know that I came from this home, I came from this children's home, and then they are able to meet other children who have come from children's homes. They are able to see children in children's home and then learn that this child who was here has now found a family. So there are people who are able to start early, and some people keep it a little bit. But the question as to when to tell exactly, I think, is more of a psychological question as opposed to a legal question.
It's not something that is in law? Or
no, the law does not say. What the law requires is for records, very good records, to be kept. So that, for example, even our Children Act talks about registration immediately upon birth. Okay, so that even if a child will end up with other parents, if their parents were known at the beginning, then that parent is in the initial birth certificate. Although after adoption, another birth certificate with the adoptive parents' names will be issued.
There's one of our viewers here, Peter Coach, who says yes at the right age when we pose the question as to when we're supposed to tell the children, the adopted children, their real parents. Perhaps, is there a specific age that, you're supposed to,
Yusuf,
tell this information?
I think that a specific age is more of a psychological than a legal question. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that counseling, I think we really need to expand adoption services in this country. In other countries, there are post-adoption services where the government pays for parents to be able to have this adoption discussion. Counseling is provided. The discussion around adoption is a national conversation, and there are government-funded centers that give, adoptive parents support after the adoption. Because I think the issue in Kenya is that we don't have that post-adoption support. So once the adoption is done, you're really on your own. So you're bringing up the child the same way a child is being brought up in a biological family. You know, they're being brought up if they were a biological child of the family, but there's no support. But there is an association of adoptive parents in Kenya, and I've had conversation with some of the members and in fact some of the leadership, and their view is you should be able to tell the child very early.
We're going to talk about that organization shortly.
Yes.
But there's another viewer here at George Muturi who says adoption in its design is merited within different aspects. It depends why, when, and is it necessary. It's somehow tricky, but upon adulthood, age, it's convenient. Again, this is a viewer who says it's not about age, it's about, I think it's in line with your line of thoughts there.
Yes, it's for the parents to determine. Now, I wish that we had a wide conversation in this country about adoption. I wish I would open my child is in grade 2. I wish I would open her textbook and see a conversation about adoption. That, you know, you don't come into the family just as a biological child, that there are children who are adopted. Now, these books are available abroad. I wish we had the support. And, you know, when you say you wish, it sounds like wishful thinking. But we do need to work towards bringing this material and the literature here, translating it into Kiswahili and into other ethnic languages. Yeah, so that it's part of the conversation.
We're going to talk about that as well shortly, about the need to have a national conversation that you've been talking about. I also have Simon Joroge, who works with the Child and Family Focus, an organization championing family-based care for orphaned and vulnerable children through care reform. He's also a founder of PA Support Group for adopted teens and adults. Joroge is joining us from the town of Nakuru. Good morning, Joroge. And I'd like you to go straight into our discussion this morning. And we're talking about, of course, adopted children. From your own perspective, do you have a specific age where these children should know about their parents? Or you also think it's about psychological things?
Yeah, I don't think there is a specific age at which the disclosure should happen. The only thing I have in my view is a ceiling beyond which it will be risky if disclosure has not been done by that time. And I would think about the age of 10 towards teenage. I would think it's advisable that the child knows before they get to teenage. As you may know, teenage is when children start going through identity crisis. And so if a child gets to that age before they are aware that they are adopted, and then they have to deal with the normal issues of identity plus the adoption issue, then it becomes tricky. But as per the timing when that should be done, I think Claire was right. The parents should be able to assess their child as per their development and be able to know the kind of information to share with the child at the right time. Children will mature differently. And so it's upon the parent to assess their child and know the age at which they will be receptive to certain kinds of information. But I believe they can start with very simple information. I believe at the age of 3, 4, a child will start asking questions about where children come from. And I believe that should be a time when the parents should use that as an entry point into explaining to the child that there can be circumstances under which the child is not being brought up by their biological parent. So it depends on the child. If a child is asking a lot of questions, then the parent should be prepared to start giving the child information that takes consideration of their age and level of maturity.
And once again, we'd like our viewers to also give us their feedback with regards to this subject of discussion this morning. And once again, on Authoritative, we're asking you, when do you think adopted children need to know about their biological parents? Once again, we're asking you, when do you think adopted children need to know about their biological parents? Our Twitter handle is at KTN News. You can as well tweet me at Yusuf Ibra. The hashtag to use, of course, is KTN News Center. Now, let me take you to some infographics that we have for you with regards to adoption. And let me start with the requirements for child adoption first. And one of the requirements is that a child must be at least 6 weeks old, declared free for adoption by a registered society. Allah is going to tell us more about those societies that are already in place. Applicants must be more than 25 years old. Below 65 years old applicants must be 21 years older than the infant. That is also another important aspect. Also, applicants should be below 65 years old. If you're above the age of 65, according to this requirement, you're not supposed to adopt any child. And then a relative or one of the child's parents can apply for adoption under Children's Act Section 158, subsection 1. Over to our next infographics that we have for you about this topic that so many people don't know about, and it has everything to do with adoption and identity. Adoption orders will not be done to sole male applicants in respect of a female child. And then adoption order will not be done to sole female applicants in respect of a male child. And then if, once again, adoption order will not be done to sole foreign applicant, so you have to be a Kenyan. And then adoption order will not be done to one or both applicants not of sound mind. Another requirement is that an adoption order will not be done to applicant or applicants charged or convicted of any offense against children, homosexuality, joint applicants not married to each other, also sole foreigners, I've already mentioned that, and applicant or applicants aged 65 years old and above. And all this is under the Children's Act, Section 158, subsection 2 and 3. Once again, we have a family lawyer with me in studio. She's going to tell us more on this. Over to our next infographics. Perhaps whose consent is needed when it comes to adoption? That is another question that so many of our viewers have been asking. One should be the existing parents, guardians, or contributor to the child's maintenance, parents or guardian or guardians of the mother of the child if the mother is a minor, and then a stepfather who has acquired parental responsibility. Those are just some of the infographics that we have for you. Leah, it seems that this is something that has been exhaustively discussed in our law, but there are some gray areas once again, which has everything to do with, the identity of these children.
Yes.
Why is there some sort of a stigma when, a child is supposed to know his or her biological parent when it comes to their names, first of all?
I think I think the reason there is stigma is because we don't talk about it enough. Because, you see, in our African setup, we used to adopt. People used to take in you. I mean, you grew up and you had cousins and sisters who lived with, cousins and relatives who stayed with you and became part of the family.
Yeah.
Even in the African customary setup, there was adoption. The issue is there was no formal, I think it's the formality of going to court. And I think once something becomes a court issue, then, everybody is, a bit quiet about it. I think we don't have enough conversations about adoption. And so there is some stigma surrounding it, and also the support after the adoption is complete, the counseling, whatever it is that the family would be facing is not discussed enough. And I think the more we talk about it, the more it becomes commonplace, and the more there is no need to, it's not a big issue. Whether you're adopted or you came in through the family may not be a very big issue. And even if it's a big issue, it's not a negative. It's not a negative issue. It's because adoption is a beautiful thing, actually. Adoption is a very beautiful thing because you're giving a child a chance. The international standard is that the best place for a child to grow up in is in a family, as opposed to an institution, okay? So if a child has, for example, been abandoned at a very young age, rather than them growing up in an institution, the best place for them is to grow up in a family. And there are families that are willing to take in these children and give them the best chance in life, give them brothers and sisters and cousins and uncles and aunties, which they wouldn't have in an institution.
Once again, it's the same family that are going to determine when it's right for them to tell these specific children about their parents, right?
And I think it's a difficult conversation, but I feel it would be a simpler conversation if we had a national conversation about it. If we had books.
You've been talking about the need to have national conversation. How can we exactly go about it? You've talked about books in school that don't even talk about adoption at all.
Yes, you don't see it. I mean, when you see, if you see a child, a class 1 or class 2 book, now it's called grade. The new term is grade 1 or grade 2.
Yes.
If you see that, there will be no issue at all about about adoption. There will be a nuclear family. There will be extended families, but you will not see a conversation saying.
It's interesting. I've never seen one.
What's even the Kiswahili word for adoption?
We don't have one.
What is the word for adoption in your mother tongue?
Okay, that's even trickier.
You see, so it's a thing that it's something that we did even traditionally, but because of the requirements requirement to go to court, make it formal, get it documents, I think people get a little bit quiet about it.
Yes, and something else that most people don't know about adoption is that if you are, let's say, I want to adopt a child, what are
Yes.
some of the things that I'm supposed to do?
Okay. The first thing to do is to go to an adoption society, a registered adoption society with a license licensed by the government to do this. And what the society will do, it will assess you for fitness to adopt, and then it will match you with a child who is free for adoption, who has been declared free for adoption. And declared free for adoption means that all their documentation is in place. And so in relation to this identity issue, it means that there are records of the child somewhere, because the child will not be declared free for adoption until there's a good, there's a good dossier of documents showing why they should be declared free for adoption. That there is nobody out there who will come back to claim them.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's a good, there has to be some good documentation to facilitate their being declared free for adoption.
Let's talk about the last name. We talk about birth certificates right now, for instance, if you want to join a primary school, we talk about a child there.
Yes.
So at what point will an adopted child decide, well, this is the last name that I want to acquire?
Just the way Justice Mativo said, when the child is 18, he says that they have a right to know once they are 18, although the conversation we are having, and as Simon said, it's better to have this conversation much, much earlier. Now, when you become an adoptive parent, the court declares you the parent of this child. And so you have a right to give this child a name. So in an ideal situation, the child would have had an earlier birth certificate where if they were given up for adoption or their parents are known, then they have that parent's name, okay? But if they were abandoned, for example, there will be X's on the mother's name and the father's name, but there is a birth certificate so that child is in the system. Now, after adoption, the parent has the right to give the child a name. That is a parental right, to give the child a name. And so the parent will give the child a name and most likely will give them their own last name, so that the child is not discriminated within the family, so that they have the last name, the same last name as everyone else.
Speaking about discrimination, there's a viewer here at Risasi 254 who says, with regards to the question we posed earlier, he says, not at any time waishi wakijua wenye wamewalea ndio wazazi halisi.
And there is that view. There is that view. But I think, as Simon was saying, it's not fair on the child, because once they get to an age where they are questioning, their identity, I think it becomes problematic. Because especially as a teenager, when you're starting to think through your identity, it would be nice to know the truth. I think it would be good to know the truth earlier. But as I said, I know that it is a difficult conversation to have.
Yes, clearly it is a difficult conversation. Now, Njoroge is still with me and still in Nakuru there. Now, Njoroge, as Leah's already pointed out, adoption is not something new, especially in the African society. But why do you think there's a lot of stigma associated with adoption?
I would think that there are issues that could got to do with some of our cultures, but I think one of the major reasons why we have a lot of stigma is because of the side of adoption that we choose to focus on. Adoption could be looked at from two different perspectives. You can look at it from a more child protective kind of perspective, like what Leah is talking about, but there is also the aspect of adoption being a way of creating family. And when it's looked at from that perspective, it comes in with a lot of its own baggage, mainly because some people would tend to associate it with childlessness. But I believe that if you were to focus on the child and the reason why the child in the first place needs to be adopted, then our perspectives would change a little bit. Maybe just ask yourself, why would people be so touched when they are watching some news of a child who has been abandoned? But if tomorrow the same child is being offered for adoption, they will be the first people to stigmatize that child and the parent. It's because those people are not able to connect the link between this child who was helpless at some point and this child who is being adopted. They don't see the link between the two. They tend mostly to focus on why the parent is adopting and not why the child is being adopted and or why the child needs to be adopted. So it's more about us looking at why is this child needing adoption? And maybe on that matter, I would like to highlight something that Leah has mentioned about the impacts of having, especially the abandoned babies, the young below the age of 3, growing up in children homes through the first 3 years of life. And I think the rule of thumb is that for every 3 months that a child below the age of 3 spends in a children's home, they lose 1 month of development. So in a sense, what we are saying, a child who spends the first 3 years of their life in a children's home will literally be 2 years of age developmentally. So that's the kind of exposure we are giving to these kids when we deny them an opportunity to be adopted. So if you start thinking about the impact of the child not being adopted on their developmental health, then you start seeing the reason why we should even be more supportive of adoption as a society. So I believe it's more, we need to focus on the child and the needs of the child. These are our children, and if you don't take care of them, no one will.
Something else, that they need to have some sort of a national conversation. She talked about even textbooks in schools that don't even mention the word adoption in itself. What do you think needs to be done to, you know, create some sort of awareness out there about adoption and, you know, put this stigma and other issues related, negative issues related to adoption on the side?
I believe, as Leah has mentioned, there is that need for a national conversation. But I think the starting point is who is leading this conversation. You realize that throughout the time we have been talking about adoption before, the conversation has been led mainly by practitioners in adoption and lawyers like Leah there. And of late, we have now seen adoptive parents. She has mentioned the existence of an adoptive parents association. I can also talk about our peer support and mentorship group for adopted children. The conversation will be more better and enriched if it is led by people who have the lived experiences of adoption. Because you will realize that most of the information people have about adoption are myths, they are misinformations. People believe stuff about people who are adopted. They believe they end up as bad people, but I interact with them every day, and we have bankers, we have people like me who are doing something good with their lives. We have a lot of these adopted people out there whose lives have not turned out as the perception has been created about how they turn out. We have parents out there, especially of the younger teenagers who I interact with a lot, who are very open to disclosure, and you will meet them and their kids know everything about where they came from, about that stuff, and the kids are okay. So if these people were to lead the conversation, they will be able to dispel a lot of these myths that people have heard from people who even have no relationship or have not come into contact with adoption at all. So for me, the conversation to be rich enough for it to change hearts and touch people's minds, it is good that the conversation is led by people who have personal and real-life intimate experiences with adoption. Because those are the ones who will tell the true stories of how they feel about it, what they think about it, and not necessarily people who assume things that they may not have experienced themselves. But I'm in no sense, at this point, I would like to clarify, saying that the other practitioners have no place in this. They have a place because I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot speak in the position of Leah, but I can speak in the position of someone who has experienced being adopted. I know what it means. I know what works right, what does not work right. I know that if I have the information, does not mean that I'm disowning my adoptive parents. It only means that I need to understand myself and know who really I am. I would like to highlight that identity is not about, is not an event. Identity is a process. The identity of a human being begins when they are born. So the moment the story before adoption is not there, then it means the child feels as if there's a blank space within them that needs to be filled. So it's not so much about even seeing and touching this biological parent, but rather having that information, understanding what happened. Why did I end up being adopted and not every other child? What happened to my life before then for me to end up here? And the parent working with the child and helping the child understand that. And I think there is research evidence that disclosure and even what we call open adoptions in more advanced practices has been proven to lead to result in better outcomes for adopted children, has been proven to lead to more stable adoptions. And so it's not about whether the child will go back there or not. It's about a developmental need that this child needs. That is proven by research. So it's the responsibility of the parent to help the child navigate that. But also, lastly, I would like to point out that I also think it's a systemic failure. As Leah mentioned earlier, in more advanced adoptions practices, the pre-adoption preparation for the parents helps them, and they are prepared well on how to handle some of these critical conversations that they'll need to have with their children at some point. So it involves a lot of counseling, and if there are issues, personal issues that may affect
and that
parenting,
these children need to know their identity. I think we are all in agreement that these children need to know their identity. And I think you've oozed all the knowledge that, Kenyans need to hear about adoption. Many thanks for that. And I think that will mark your final remark here with regards to this discussion. Leah, as you make your final comment, perhaps let me drag you back to the conversation we've been having earlier, the uncomfortable conversation of telling these children who, their real parents are. Apart from identity,
they're biological.
Why is it important? Apart from knowing the identity, what else is what else do they stand in gaining from knowing their parents?
I think because truth is important. Everybody's truth is important. So if that is part of their truth, I think it's important to tell them. And I think we've not researched enough. And that's why I completely agree with Simon in terms of who should be leading this conversation. Because we really have looked at the legal side. The law does protect this right to identity, but it would be very interesting to have the conversation with people who have adopted, people who have been adopted and grown up, parents, who have, so Simon was apologizing for saying that shouldn't be, like he's trying to say I'm still part of the process. I am still part of the process, but it's very important that we expand this conversation and the rights and the people who are really in it have this conversation. I'll say something small about stigma, if you give me a chance. Do I have a... I have people who say, oh, they don't want to adopt. With what Simon was saying that the adopted children don't end up well. But biological children, it doesn't. There's no. Even biological children can go. Can go off. Yes. And I have people say, you don't know where the child is from, you don't know their history, you don't know, who their ancestors were. And I keep saying, I don't know my ancestors. I may know up to my grandfather. I don't know 10 generations ago whether there was an evil person in my family. When you meet and fall in love with somebody and marry them, you don't know. You can only see their mother and their grandfather. You don't know way beyond that.
Sure.
Who was, and then you have babies with them.
Sure, Leah. Of course, this is a conversation that will continue, not just here, but across the country. Thank you very much, Leah Kigwadu Muteru. She is a child and family lawyer. And earlier, this is what we did ask you on our Twitter poll. When do you think adopted children need to know about their biological parents? Let me go through 2 or 3 of them here. Langat Victor says, when they are mature enough. He has not mentioned a specific age. Anita Morara says, after guidance and counseling, and immediately they know themselves and accept themselves. Okay, this one, let me just skip this one. And then Boy Q Sam says, after marriage can be better for them entering a new family. Keep on... make the comments there on social media. There is a Twitter page, and I'm going to go through some of your feedback still within the program. But now